All right, hello Honors 410. I hope everyone's doing well. I'm going to try to keep today's video lecture on the short side, largely because we have 4 separate Flash submissions that came in for today. Just the way the schedule worked out, we had to have one day where we have 4 of them, or else just we have to have one outlier that was on its own separate day. So I want to leave you plenty of time to read and digest and respond to those. So I'm going to try to keep this video lecture on the short side. We'll see how I do on that. So a few quick housekeeping notes. First off, group-led discussion 1 is coming up a week from today. So I expect that group is probably well on top of that task, at least in terms of having done the reading and thinking about it or coordinating who's doing what. But just in case that's sneaking up on anyone, a reminder that that's what's going on there. And then group-led discussion number 2 comes up in 2 weeks from today. So, and then they'll be kind of on a rolling basis from there. So just keep an eye on that. Make sure you're aware of when your group is going. If you have any confusion about, again, working with your group mates, if you have not been able to communicate with your group for some reason, I've had a handful of cases in the past, especially in this online format, where there was some confusion around things like that. Please let me know, because it only will become really problematic if someone just doesn't have a group and we never figure it out and I have nothing to grade, and then we have to scramble to figure something out. As long as we know, where we stand on that, we can resolve that usually with relative ease. Also wanted to make note the critical essay assignment is coming up, so you still have a good, solid week and a half or so, or a little over that before it's going to be due. But just again, not to let it sneak up on you. I think it's a very manageable task as long as you're staying on top of it and planning and getting some work done in the drafting stages. On the topic of drafts, the syllabus asks you to bring in a draft for one of the days. I think it says parentheses partial and then draft. That would be for the purposes of doing a peer review exercise in class if we were meeting in person. Because we're not meeting in person, I found that my attempts to coordinate peer review exercises online have not been as successful as I would like. So I'm not gonna have anyone do that. I'm going to invite people to reach out to each other to coordinate if anyone would like to work as partners in some sort of peer review for this assignment, but nothing mandatory. So you don't need to have a draft ready, especially not a full draft by the class that asks for that. Just know that I encourage you to be working ahead, and again, I'll invite you to find partners on a voluntary basis to exchange manuscripts and give some feedback. But there's no assignment due before the actual due date in that way, if that makes sense. Flash cluster number 3 is posted for today, as I referenced earlier. Really looking forward to seeing these pieces. I think you'll find a lot to enjoy in them. And then again, just keep an eye for those of you who have not yet submitted your Flash pieces for when those are coming up. The advantage of going later in this process is, of course, that you've gotten to see what other people have done. And then I'll also just make mention, so we do have coming up on the later stage of the semester, we still have a few weeks before this is really even a consideration, but it doesn't hurt to make mention of it. The workshop process, where you'll be invited to submit a story or essay in the sense of a non-fictional story or a critical essay based on the things that we've done in class up to this point. I'm making mention of it now just to have it in the background that there will be that significant writing assignment coming up in the latter stages of the course, where everyone is going to submit a manuscript for the whole class to read and discuss and respond to. Rest assured, the grading is commensurate with what I'm asking you to do, whereas you'll basically automatically get an A as long as you meet the rough parameters of the assignment. But the purpose of this is for us to have some discussion around that. I am open to these pieces being extensions, expansions, or explorations of what you already wrote about in your Flash pieces. It doesn't have to be. And in fact, if you're trying to decide, I would generally encourage people to do something new and fresh. I think despite it seeming easier to have already written something and just did expand on it, a lot of times I find students actually end up finding that harder just because they already have something written that they have to work within the context of, and it may have already kind of been a full story. But if you have ideas for expanding it, I'm open to that being an expansion of these. Just keeping that in mind as we're going through this Flash process as well. But okay, so without further ado, though, I want to go ahead and dive into the Stephen Moore reading that we had for today. So we backed up. So I started us pretty late in the book just because I feel like that essay, some of the bigger ideas that it tackles were useful for us to get to first in accessing what Moore is writing about. It's debatable, though, right? So now we're backing up to the very beginning of the book, and we're largely following just the order of the book going forward here with a few exceptions. So the first place I wanted to go was just page one, the last sentence of the first paragraph. So it reads, ripping in was like being broken in, as though to understand a place you first had to learn about the way it was damaged, then become that way yourself. And I just think that's such an interesting line, right? This idea of understanding a place, you have to know how it's damaged. In a war zone, that makes a fair bit of sense. But I think that there's a logic that might apply well beyond that context, just places where we are in general. You could look at the UNLV campus, for example. At how is this place damaged? There's literal damages that have happened, across campus through, minor accidents and just wear and tear and things like that. They might say there are more philosophical damages, right? That happened, to the Las Vegas community when there was that incident with the shooter, a few years back. You might say, in terms of the threat that came out of mass violence last semester, or no, that was last fall, if I'm remembering correctly. It's all a blur. That whole life before the pandemic feels like it's all one big fuzzy blur to me now. But nonetheless. Okay, to give you a peek behind the curtain, I record these videos on my phone for the most part. So when I get a phone call, that interrupts the flow of things. So apologize for being a little jumpy here. So to get right back into it, I was referencing ways in which a place can be damaged, talking about UNLV or the larger Las Vegas community, because I think these ideas that Moore is getting into apply to more than just his immediate scenario, and more even than just to situations of violence or a war zone, but more broadly. So in any event, I think that could be interesting to meditate on, the idea of understanding how a place is damaged and then becoming that way yourself. What we think of that, what he means, and if we agree with him, because I think that there's some room for discussion there. On page 2, into this transition here. So there's this big block of text where it becomes a little bit more narrative, sort of in a way here, right? Where he's more rendering a story and someone is telling him, but without the actual dialogue. And I'm curious what we kind of make of this, and I'm going to show my hand a little bit in terms of how I read this. There's something called telling war stories, right? And I'm sure many of you have heard this before. It can mean literally a veteran telling a story of when they were in battle, or when they were at least abroad, or otherwise in the military, telling their war stories. It's entered kind of our more general kind of culture, where we'll say telling old war stories, like I might go back to my office at the Honors College and talk to another professor about a war story from the classroom, right? Where it's like, well, this one time I had a student who came in halfway through the class and was really disruptive and yada yada yada. Or this one time I had a student who clearly hadn't read the right text and went on this huge tangent about the reading before I could interrupt to kind of say, I think you're talking about a different reading. We tell these war stories, and I'm sure you have them from your own work experiences, your own experiences as a student, from your own family experiences even. But this culture of kind of telling a story, it's a part of kind of a certain culture, and specifically in a war setting or in a military kind of setting. And I'd say that there's a thin line that Moore's kind of demonstrating here. When we tell these stories, it's often two people who we expect can relate or kind of commiserate with them, or maybe even learn from them, right? And I would suggest there's an element of when Moore is being told this story, that he's getting sort of a form of training. We get a lot about his more formal training. This is sort of the informal piece of it, when he's being told stories and he's not so sure which parts of it are official and important and which parts of it are more casual and just kind of being social. I think that's an interesting aspect of what Moore is kind of discussing in this essay. I want to go to page 6 here. So we get this pretty substantial tangent in the second half of page 6, kind of after the break, where we get a bunch about Home Alone 2, right? Which at first blush can be kind of random, I would suggest, but I think it has some real purposeful kind of use here, right? Where he's sort of contrasting what happens in a kid's movie to these more dire stakes of being in a war zone. He's kind of taking something more mundane and kind of non-dramatic about life in Afghanistan, which, as a few of you pointed out, he referenced it in the essay we read for last time as well, that it wasn't all mounting tension and constantly being in battle. A lot of it was kind of mundane day-to-day stuff and just sort of getting used to a new routine, and with the threat of violence kind of looming and knowing the purpose of why they were there, but still not every moment of this was so dramatic. And then this sense of having to repeat the same things over that he recognizes in the movie that happened in the first movie have to happen again in the second movie in a different way, of having to play out certain patterns over and over again, and that being in some ways reflective of Moore's experience too, right? Of having to repeat these same tasks or getting used to new routines or so on and so forth. From page 10 to 11, we get kind of the story of how Moore was able to access the internet, and how he's given these wires, and how he messes around with them and tries to make them work and gets really frustrated because it's not working for him, and then ultimately just orders them on Amazon and has them delivered to him, which it's sort of random again. To me, this is one of my favorite pieces, though, of the essay, if not of the entire book, just because of the sheer practicality of it, right? When we think about soldiers going into a war zone, we don't necessarily think of how are they going to get their individual internet access, right? That's not a place where my head goes early on. And then this idea of what it would take to get internet access, and then kind of the absurdity of I'm just going to hop on someone else's computer, go to Amazon, and order an Ethernet cord, right? Because that's what we would do here if you didn't just use wireless, obviously. But if you needed an Ethernet cord, you'd probably just go somewhere where you did have internet access, order this thing, wait for it to arrive, and then you'd be set up, right? And I kind of like sort of the understated humor almost of kind of the absurdity of that moment of he's in this war zone, he can still get a package from Amazon delivered to him. I think that's again almost just kind of humorous to me. I'm just gonna take us one more place for now. Again, there's so much we could talk about here, but on pages 15 to 16, he brings in this idea of basketball, and specifically of the flex offense that he references. And I think that it's an interesting kind of just sort of tangent he goes on here, because the basketball, the flex offense doesn't really have that much to do with the story he's saying. But I think, again, he takes something that seems sort of separate and disparate and relates it to the current situation. And so he places this emphasis, for example, on that they have to burn all the envelopes when they get mail. And then he talks a little bit about kind of the absurdity of it, and then he doesn't actually know if that's an actual policy or just a practical consideration, because, well, yeah, we don't want anyone getting our home addresses and then sending bombs or poison or whatnot. And then it arrives at the conclusion that it's all kind of absurd. It all just might be made up, right? And just something that someone said once, and it was like, oh yeah, we should probably burn these things, and not really a policy at all, right? And sort of relating that to the basketball piece of this, the flex offense that he's talking about. I think if you are familiar with basketball, it helps here, but I don't think you need to have a basketball background to understand what he's saying. Just this idea that's kind of a flowing offense. It keeps opening up options and invites people to keep passing. But they got so good at it, they forgot to actually shoot the basketball, right? To actually, the main purpose of this thing is to open up opportunities for someone to score. They forget to score because they're so in the flow of just doing this routine thing over and over again. And it connects a little bit back to that Home Alone example from earlier on, but I think, again, more so just these things that they do in this new life that he has in the military that don't necessarily make very much sense, right? That they just do because they've done them before. I think that in and of itself offers some interesting food for thought. So I'm going to end the video there. Again, apologize for kind of the ragged kind of transition I had in the middle there. I didn't throw anyone too far off, like it threw me off a little bit. But again, I look forward to our discussion of ripping in, and then all the more so to our discussion of the four flash pieces that we have for today. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.